One of the things we don't talk about enough when it comes to recruiting volunteers for your church or your ministry are the other factors that impact volunteer recruitment, even though they're not directly related, right? And there's lots of those factors, tons of those factors that impact volunteer recruitment, whether we realize it or not. And one of them is your values or your culture. I prefer the term culture, but values are a part of that. And we'll talk about in a moment how they're related and why that's important. But I prefer the term culture when we're talking about this. Your culture, like the culture of your church, the culture of your ministry, and the culture of your volunteer team, which can all be like related but different, they all will impact how well you can recruit volunteers. Answer this question to yourself. Between mission, vision, strategy, and culture, what's the most important? If you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment. Let me know what you think is the most important of all four of these things. I would argue that the most important in terms of just what it means for your church and your ministry is mission, because that's your purpose. That's why you exist. Then I'd probably have vision, would be probably my second most important, because you have to know where you're headed. Like, where are we going? What's the picture of the preferred future that we're chasing? Then I would probably say strategy or culture. It would be a toss up. Strategy, you have to know how you're going to do what you're going to do. Culture really matters though. But here's the thing, even though culture is probably third or fourth in terms of importance on my list, it is number one in terms of what people experience first. So in some ways, it's almost more important than the other things, because if you don't get this right, nobody's ever going to learn what your mission is, or what your vision is, or what your strategy is, and how you're going to get there. So you may have heard that phrase usually attributed to Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I would agree. I don't know if Peter did say that. He didn't write it, so that's a little bit of an unknown quote. Nobody is 100% sure of the source on that. Whoever said it, I agree with it. I think strategy is really important, but culture can, beat all of that out, even mission and vision, because people are going to experience that first. So think about somebody who could serve in your ministry. They have some picture of what the culture is like. Now, they may not have a great picture because they've never actually done it. Maybe they haven't even observed it. But there's probably some sense based on your church culture of what they think it's like, because culture is how we do things here. Think about, I love going to Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A has a great culture. They have certain statements, right? My pleasure, certain things they do repeatedly, consistently, that kind of create the culture. So it's not a coincidence. Obviously, they have great food. It wouldn't work if they didn't have great food, but it's not a coincidence that a Chick-fil-A can do so much more business in one less day a week than other fast food places, because they have a great culture. It's a game changer when it comes to volunteer recruiting, because a great culture attracts people. Actually, I should say great culture attracts great people, but a great culture attracts people. People want to be a part of that. So here's 4 tips for creating a healthy volunteer culture that will help you recruit more volunteers. Number 1, create common language or values. So this is where the values phrase comes in again. Here's what you want to do though. Don't think of values like we value, and you're a church, the Bible, prayer, discipleship. Not that you don't value those things, you absolutely do, but you want to create values or culture statements that are unique. Ideally, that are getting a little bit more specific to how we do things here. All churches that follow Jesus and love God and want to help make disciples like the Bible calls us to should value the Bible and prayer and all of making disciples and evangelism and all these things. So what are the unique things about how we do things here that shape your culture, that create your culture? And come up with phrases for that. Patrick Lencioni has a great book called The Advantage. I would recommend you read that. And one of the things he talks about in there is to not use what he calls permission to play values, meaning those are values every church should have. If it was an automobile industry, right? It'd be like, those are values every automobile industry should have. Don't just go with permission to play values. Come up with common language for how you want to do it. So for example, I know of a church in their kids ministry where one of their values is we make it fun. Elevation, I think. And I'm not sure if it's still the same when I'm recording this, but their church has the Elevation Code. And so that's a list of values. But then they also had additional values for kids ministry. We make it fun. We make it safe. Those were 2 of them. So they didn't kind of replace their church-wide culture statements. They just added a few on. I've been to a church where we give ministry away was a value. Our church, one of our culture statements is we are not just consumers, we're contributors. Actually, I think I said it backwards. I think it's we are contributors, not just consumers. And that's just, again, it's a phrase we can use to help people understand that we have to own our own faith, that we have to be a part of serving. We are the church. It's not just something that we consume. Now, you have to think about, what do you want those statements to be? They need to match the kind of culture you're creating. This will take some time, gather some people, help, get their help in brainstorming a bunch of statements and phrases, and kind of get the ideas first, like, oh, we want to hit this idea. We want to hit this idea, and then come back and wordsmith it and create the actual phrases that you want. I know of a church that I'm working with where they have a culture of modern liturgy. They're trying to blend some of those practices that were prevalent in the Bible and throughout all of church history, but making that modern in a way that people could relate to. So you can look up church culture and values, search for some church websites and see some examples out there, but work on creating your list. Then once you have it, tip 2, repeat the values and phrases often. Maybe that's every week in your email that you send to volunteers. You put one of the culture statements in there. Maybe it's every week at your volunteer huddle, or if you do a volunteer huddle where you get volunteers together before they're going to serve and kind of talk about what's going to happen that day, cast vision, give them some information, pray for each other and for what's about to happen. That's a place where you could talk about one of the culture statements. Maybe it's once a month. You send out a short video, over email or social media or text or whatever, and you're talking about one of the culture statements, and you just keep getting those culture statements in front of people. Reward people somehow when you see it happening, like tell the story of when that person exhibited that culture that your church and your ministry wants to have. Because like Andy Stanley says, what's rewarded is repeated. So repeat those values. Tip number 3, and this is where the first 2 don't cost you any money. 3 and 4 is going to cost a little bit of money probably. And you may not be able to do all these. My church has not done all of these things, throughout all of our history, but we have implemented them at times. Tip 3 is create a volunteer room and provide snacks, drinks, and candy. Because again, we're trying to create this magnetic, fun culture, and we're trying to get volunteers around each other at a time when they can get to know each other, talk, connect. So if you have this specific volunteer room, which could double as something else, like midweek, it might be something else in your church. Or even on Sunday morning during services, it's a volunteer room. On Sunday night, student ministry uses it, for something else. That would be fine. But create a volunteer room and provide snacks, drinks, candy. Just make it a fun place that they can take ownership of. This is their room, and you are, giving them food, caffeine, sugar, whatever, candy, to make that more attractive. And then tip number 4, get shirts for your volunteers, which this might sound like, really, shirts are, going to move the needle in terms of culture. They do. There's just something about, hey, all those people are wearing that same shirt. They're smiling. They're having fun. They seem committed. Like they care about what they do. It just creates this sense of that's a team. That's a team right there. And so if, shirts aren't cheap, but if you have it in the budget, you could get shirts for your volunteers to help create that culture. One hack that we've used at times, especially when we want to get a different shirt and we just bought shirts maybe 6 months ago, is share the cost a little bit. Maybe the shirts cost $8 a shirt and the church is going to pay for $3 a shirt. And then you just ask volunteers if they can pay $5. A lot of people are going to be able to pay $5 for a t-shirt, and they might even want 2 if they're, not going to be so good at washing them and making sure it's ready every week. But get shirts for your volunteers. That'll help create that culture that you want. The important thing is that there's a culture that exists, whether you realize it or not. The question is, did you intentionally create it? Is it the culture you want? If not, take some of these steps to implement the culture that you want so that recruiting volunteers becomes easier, because new people, when you're talking to somebody about volunteering, they're going to have a good impression of what that looks like. Or your current volunteers who have, a good experience and are part of the culture will tell their friends at church, hey, it's a lot of fun. We do this and this and this. Like they're going to own that culture because they love it. There's more resources at ministryboost.org if you want to check out the courses and the resources we have there that can help you, especially with the practical parts of recruiting volunteers. But this is one of many videos and talks about game changers for recruiting, because a good volunteer culture is a game changer for recruiting volunteers in your church.